Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, in Mandarin for my residents, please. 重建计划 SERS 在4月发布后，我陆续跟一些居民谈了谈。我一共有606户居民受影响，并且家家有本难念的经。一位单身妈妈离婚后努力工作，才从原本的租赁租屋搬到现在的转售租屋。一位 uncle 希望可以继续住在同样的大小的租屋，这样孙子孙女才可以常来居住。一位居民最近因为老房子的市高剥落，必须花光自己的积蓄去修补。还有一对年长的姐妹，为了互相照顾，特地买了2间相邻的租屋。姐姐告诉我，她的薪水只是勉强维生，她才刚还清房贷，现在不知道怎么办才好。说的时候，他急得快哭了。在这里，我想分享一些居民的心声。他们写信给我说，收到 SERS 的消息后，我们一直在担心我们的租房的问题。我的居民担心，我也很担心，因为他们大多是年长者和退休的人士。他们还是说，我们将与政府合作，实现双赢的局面，让居民在无压力的环境中退休，土地更好的为我们的后代所用。First, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, I'd like to sincerely thank our residents in Chengshan, Seletar for their trust in sharing their worries and concerns with my team and I, as well as the HDB team as well, who have been willing to listen to these concerns and also have taken steps to propose options for residents. It has been many sleepless nights on either side. Since the announcement in April, I've had the opportunity to speak with my residents who live in the 4 blocks identified for the Selective On-Block Redevelopment Scheme, or SERS for short. I've spoken to some residents during my house visits, at Meet the People sessions, on the phone, via email, and other means. Now, in past SERS exercises, words such as windfall or the lucky ones were used, but SERS can be seen as a bane. It depends on the circumstances of each individual household and the sites which have been identified. I've encountered different reactions. Some look at it as an opportunity to replace an old flat with a new one that will likely appreciate in value. Meanwhile, for others, it is a destabilizing event. Beyond financial reasons, some are reluctant to move as they saw themselves growing old for the rest of their lives in the current unit. These perspectives are informed by factors like age of the homeowners, health, employment status, ability to take on debt, and the financial implication of the large difference in market value between their old flats and the price of the new ones. Now, this adjournment motion is motivated by the Ang Mo Kio SERS exercise in the constituency that I serve. However, as redevelopment is a fact of life in land-scarce Singapore, I hope that the context of the issues raised and potential solutions proposed will be given consideration in the broader pursuit of achieving equitable outcomes in housing redevelopment. So, with more than 80% of our population today living in HDB flats, home ownership continues to be a cornerstone of our public housing system. As our flats continue to age, creeping towards year 99, redevelopment has become an even more important part of being able to fulfill the housing needs of future generations. I would like to take a moment to briefly look at the rationale for the 99-year lease. In the 1950s, living conditions were a far cry in the settlements than what they are today. And to remedy this, in the 1960s, the HDB was established. From its formation, it was clear that in land-scarce Singapore, the constant development of new towns further and further out from the core was not going to be tenable. And as explained in the National Day Rally 2018 by Prime Minister, the 99-year lease was introduced to be fair to future generations too. At the crux of this is the ability to be able to, upon the end of the 99-year lease, reclaim the land and build new flats for the next generation of homeowners. This makes sense. Demand for public housing is steep, as earmarked by the oversubscriptions generally each time HDB releases a new BTO project or the many MPS appeals that my fellow honourable colleagues face every week. Now, redevelopment programs like SERS were introduced as part of a broader strategy to meet this demand by ensuring that land is used more effectively. SERS is a selective scheme limited to precincts with high redevelopment potential. We have heard that this applies to only approximately 5% of all HDB estates and that most projects have already been selected. I ask that we consider how to best mitigate the chasm between the needs of the future and the needs of the present. SERS is blunt in its application, affecting all residents of the identified estates, but given the variety of the homeowners and complexity of the housing schemes, the solutions offered cannot be based on a one-size-fits-all approach. In this regard, HDB has over the years introduced new policies to cater to a diverse customer base, sensitive to needs, and refined provisions to suit changing circumstances. The implementation of redevelopment programs like SERS faces inherent challenges, exacerbated by factors like an aging population and the financial burden inherent to a decaying lease. Now, to illustrate this, the SERS flats in Ang Mo Kio are approximately 43 years old, with around 56 years left on the lease as of the date of the announcement. At the same time, more than half of my residents are over the age of 55. So take the case of Mr. S, a retiree, who shared that he's lived there for over 40 years as an original owner. He's paid off the loan for his flat and has been living on his savings since he first retired. His daughters and grandchildren visit frequently and they see this time and space together as a retreat. He is in his 70s and so can no longer take out a new loan, which means that he will need to use his savings to pay for the replacement flat. Due to the difference in lease values of the old and new flat, according to him, HDB conservative estimates were that he might have to pay up to $135,000 if he chooses a comparable unit of the same size. And many residents who showed me their estimated financial plans were worried that just to maintain a flat of the same size in the replacement site could involve a top-up of $70,000, $80,000, $90,000, which meant dipping into their retirement savings or trying to find a new loan. In the alternative, they could move to an area where houses are cheaper or accept a smaller unit. But given that they didn't ask to be rehomed, or that they were interested in a unit with a new lease in the first place, these outcomes are, to put it plainly, shocking to them. For this reason, I do welcome the recent announcements by HDB to offer alternative lease options, and I sincerely thank those involved in bringing this to fruition, as I know that such shifts in policy require much deliberation. But even with these options, there are still gaps to cross, as needs vary greatly across our resident demographics. While I understand that it is improbable in policy making that every single circumstance gets accounted for, I think members of this House will agree that the goal is to strive towards making sure that homeowners do not get disadvantaged by redevelopment programs like SERS. And since value will be unlocked, I hope that this can be shared with residents. I have some clarifications. I'll begin with rehousing options, focusing on the options for a new replacement flat. 2 days ago, HDB announced some bold additions to the rehousing options available, which also meant changes in my speech. In the discussions I've had with residents, a significant number indicated that they did not need or want to buy a new 99-year lease. They just want to live out their retiring years in peace. I am glad that residents now have this option of a 50-year lease. During house visits on Saturday, Madam Loh and Mr. Tang, in their 60s and 70s, were appreciative that this option was now available, allowing them to move to a brand new flat of a similar size for roughly the same number of years left on their current lease by the time the replacement site is completed. But there still may be barriers standing in the way of achieving the intended positive effects, notably the Bala curve. The financial value of leases decay in an accelerated fashion towards the end of the lease. In simple terms, what this means for SERS residents is this. 50% of the lease doesn't mean 50% of the listing price. Every 99-year leasehold land in Singapore is pegged to 96% of freehold land's value. And as the lease starts to get used up, the value of the land as a percentage of the freehold land decreases. Now, estimates drawn up by HDB naturally make certain assumptions. Residents will be able to use all their CPF refunded sums to buy a new flat. They are eligible for a SERS grant of $30,000, and there is no outstanding loan for their current home. Based on these assumptions, I understand that residents who decide to purchase homes on a 50-year lease will generally see positive proceeds from the sale of their flats. In the same examples provided by HDB, should the current homeowner pick the 99-year lease option for a replacement 4-room flat, they could be $55,000 out of pocket as an estimate. But what percentage of residents actually meet all these assumptions? I seek the Ministry's assurance that no resident will have to top up further funds should they choose this proposed 50-year lease option. And if it's not the case, then what will HDB's approach be to ensure that no resident is disadvantaged? As part of HDB's Home for Life strategy, this option is only granted to residents over the age of 55, homeowners over the age of 55. And I asked if HDB will consider extending this option to younger homeowners on a case-by-case basis if they find it more affordable. I also note that homeowners who purchase this 50-year lease will be able to sell or rent out their flats in the future. And given the young age that this applies to, I think this is a good idea. However, I seek some clarity. For example, a 46-year-old resident who may go through a medical emergency in 10 years after moving into the new home, which causes a lot of financial strain, to the point where her family may need to downsize their house to receive cash on hand for treatment. I understand that it's not possible for HDB to know what the housing market will be like in the future, but I wonder if the market for such shorter lease homes will be a ready and favourable one for sellers. How will they be priced? And what will happen once the full 50 years run out, given that the rest of the estate will have until 99 years? In the future, this estate may pose a curious mix of flats with varying leases, potentially creating price distortions in the market. And I would like to ask if HDB has considered these implications. So one other change which HDB has proposed is to permit eligible residents to participate in the lease buyback scheme with their existing flat. Previously, flat owners could no longer apply for the lease buyback scheme after their flat has been announced for SERS and would have to fulfill a 5-year MOP on their replacement flat. Given that many living in these SERS blocks are seniors, a significant portion will qualify for this. However, the take-up rate of LBS is low, fairly small. 1,636 households in 2019 and 1,528 households in 2020. There are both emotional and financial reasons given for this. Some wish to hand their homes down to children, some prefer to sublet as rental income, some would rather the cash be realised on hand rather than going to CPF, and some feel there is uncertainty if they outlive the length of the lease. Through this SERS exercise, I fully empathise with the concerns of our residents. As LBS requires careful consideration, I would like to ask if HDB will be able to consider either dialogues or individual sessions with seniors who wish to consider this. One other rehousing option is a 10% priority in new sales exercises if the delivery possession date of such flats are before that of the SERS replacement site. Now, some residents see this as a good opportunity to move nearer their children or grandchildren or nearer to schools of their school-going children's choices. But I have 2 points here. Some residents have also expressed hopes of applying and receiving the 10% priority allocation for another upcoming Ang Mo Kio BTO launch in August, consisting of 2, 4, 5 and 3 gen flats, in particular highlighting that this will be nearer the MRT. For intergenerational families or young families who wish to take this chance to buy a bigger home, the 5-room option here, which is not available in the SERS replacement site, is an attractive and important one. Some are eagerly awaiting to hear the delivery possession date. Priority allocation would allow them some certainty, as the largest flat type in the previous Ang Mo Kio BTO in November 2019 was oversubscribed by more than 13 times. I would also like to ask, based on past SERS exercises, how many exercises have SERS-affected residents been able to choose from on average, which allowed them this 10% priority allocation? Knowing these estimates will allow them to plan accordingly. Out of the 606 resident households, there are approximately a quarter of residents who are required to pay a resale levy. I understand the principle of this is building a pot of monies that will be redistributed from sellers who have benefited from subsidized housing in the past to buyers whose turn it is now to benefit from said subsidy. The resale levy payable is determined at the point you book your second subsidized flat, and payment must be made using your flat sales proceeds and/or cash. Housing loans are not extended. In 2019, the Honourable Member, Ms. Tin Pei Ling, had asked, given that SERS is involuntary, whether the government could consider waiving the resale levy for households affected by SERS. This is an ask by many who do not have this cash, and I would like to ask if MND can consider waiving or deferring the payment of this levy. I appreciate the HDB SERS team who have taken great pains to walk through the SERS timeline in detail with residents. I understand that the valuation of the homes will be released sometime in Q4 2002. Many have felt the uncertainty, with some already putting their flats on the open market for prices as high as $700,000. The rehousing decision has to be made by Q1 2023. I ask the Ministry's assurance that the residents will be given ample time to consider their options, and many have shared that 3 months are not enough. They hope that valuation will be carefully considered and released as soon as possible so they can make plans. Finally, on valuation. Many have expressed disappointment on the estimations, highlighting the number of bus services currently running at the SERS blocks versus the new site, access to wet market, and in particular proximity to the future Tavistock MRT station. Works for this station have started, and they will be putting up with the dust and the noise, but not able to reap the benefits. Could the Ministry clarify if such conveniences are being considered in the independent valuer's valuation, and also that the new site will be improved along the way to include amenities, given that this estate will be home to at least 1,000 households? I also understand that the new SERS replacement area has been marked for further residential use. Could the Ministry please elaborate what they can expect in the future, and what will become of the old site? On pricing, the range of a 4-room flat in the replacement site is up to $563,000. And with BTO prices rising, I'll be grateful if the Ministry could share what the breakdown of the components that make up this price. Finally, one other concern I have is on the number of new replacement flats available. The projected total number of flats is 1,065 up to level 25, whereas the current SERS flat only has 606 units up to level 13. So based on my estimation, this means that there's only 530 flats in the new site that are level 13 and below. So this implies that if all current residents select the new site, some residents will have to buy a higher floor, meaning a higher price, or may have to choose a different flat type, depending on the mix. I'll be grateful if HDB could please revisit the flat mix and ensure there is a comparable flat. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in Malay, please. Seperti yang kita dapat lihat, kemampuan untuk memiliki sebuah rumah adalah salah satu kebimbangan utama bagi setiap warga Singapura. Bagi pasangan muda yang baru mula bekerja, mereka bimbang wang simpanan dan wang CPF tidak mencukupi untuk membeli flat baru, memandangkan kos perumahan yang semakin meningkat. Bagi yang sudah bersara, seperti ramai penduduk Cheng San Selita yang dipilih untuk menjalani SERS, mereka bimbang tidak mampu untuk membeli rumah ganti. Oleh itu, subsidi dan grant sebanyak RM30,000 dan RM10,000 allowance pindah bagi pembelanjaan munasabah amat dialu-alukan. Saya harap pemerintah dapat semak semula subsidi dan bantuan yang diberikan kerana saya difahamkan kali terakhir ia disemak ada pada tahun 2014. Mr. Speaker, sir, I committed to bringing my residents' SERS appeal to Parliament. We have 606 affected households, hard-working Singaporeans who have worked for most of their lives to pay off their housing loans, and many have been looking forward to living out their older years debt-free. Each of these units tell different stories, and many of them are close neighbours and even hope to ballot together to continue staying along the same corridors. I am grateful that we have written a successful housing story over the past few decades. And while there are no easy answers in redevelopment, whether SERS or VERS, as our leases decay, we must write a new chapter, assure and bring along our people so they know that they will always have a fair and concrete stake in our country. Thank you, sir.